Hello and welcome to a new episode of That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. My name is Françoise, and today I would like to talk to you about dealing with anger on your fertility journey. This is actually a question that came up in one of my group programs where someone told me I just feel so angry all the time, and how can I shift that? I think that was the question she asked me, and I thought it was a really important question and that there's also many layers to this question, to the answer to that question. So I decided to record an entire podcast episode about this. And the reason I say that there are many layers is that just in that question, how can I transform this, or how can I, get rid of the anger? I think that already shows us how difficult our relation as women is with anger. I was talking with a friend about this the other day, and she said, well, men are basically allowed only one emotion. That's anger. Like, we don't find it really appropriate for a man to cry. I'm generalizing, of course, but men are not supposed to cry. Men are not supposed to be afraid. They're allowed to be angry. For women, it's the other way around. We are allowed every other emotion except anger. So, it's okay for women to cry. It's okay for them to be afraid. But when you're angry, you're hysterical. I remember, back at my previous job, um, my boss actually asked me at one point, like, why are you so angry all the time? What's going on? And I replied, well, you promised me a promotion and you're not giving it to me. Like, you broke your promise. That's why I'm angry. Um, and I did really wonder, did she say that to me because I'm a woman and because I got very fierce and angry with her about that broken promise? It surprised me that she would remark that she would yeah say something about that. Today we're looking specifically at anger on the fertility journey, and there is so much I know from my own experience to be angry about. There's anger at the body for not working as it's supposed to be working, anger maybe at having to enter fertility treatment where you don't want to, where you're angry that you are the one who it's not working for. There can be anger at friends or coworkers who do get pregnant, people who don't understand what you're going through, who make the stupid remarks, anger at your partner for not supporting you, anger at your doctors for not giving you the treatment you need. There's so much to be angry about. Um, and what I want to do in this episode is show you that there's actually different types of anger that might be going on here. And that a really good starting point, especially when you're uncomfortable being with anger, a good starting point is just to see, like, what am I dealing with? That gives you a bit of a hook, something to hold on to. And then from that understanding, okay, this is the anger that I'm dealing with, then I can give you some specific strategies to work with that. Not to make the anger go away, not to tell you like you're not supposed to be angry, but to use that anger in a way that it helps you, because anger is a really important emotion also. It's an emotion that tells you where that your boundaries are not being respected. It's an emotion that tells you that your nervous system is out of balance, that there's an intense fear maybe that's being activated, and that's why you're lashing out. Anger tells us that you've been holding in for too long and you can no longer repress it. And you need to find a way to vent those, repressed emotions. So there's so much that we can learn from anger. And it starts by not being afraid of anger, not wanting to push the anger away, and really allowing that anger in. Um, but as I mentioned, that's difficult. We have that cultural inheritance. I call that good girl conditioning, where we need to be agreeable all the time. We need to be the good girl. We don't want to stir up any troubles. And that's not just us. I mean, that's millennia of women who've been taught that we should, that basically being the good girl is a survival strategy. Being the good girl means that you won't be persecuted, you won't be, burnt at the stake, you won't be put in a mental hospital because your partner calls you hysterical. It's safe to be the good girl. And that's why it's so difficult for us to be angry, get angry. And it also means that our boundaries keep being violated, because you need that healthy anger to be able to protect yourself in a much more um, effective way, I would say, especially nowadays. The fact that we're not doing that, that we keep swallowing everything that comes at us, it means that that repressed rage turns inwards. And so it's a real burden on your nervous system. It's a real burden on your subconscious mind, even at the cellular level. Like the stress that that repressed anger or that the repressed emotions create, you can see that at the cellular level, changing the way your body processes your DNA or is able to read your DNA. So this is how trauma or how repression or how repressed emotions um, become physical, how they can have these real physical effects on your body. So you can really sort of resemble it to fire. Fire is not allowed to move. It just burns you from the inside. And what we want to do is create space for that fire to clear the path, basically, to clear the path towards a life that really nourishes you. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of different types of anger, and it's good to be aware of that. Um, I'm not necessarily discussing them in an order, just the ones that I wrote down. So a first type of anger, you know me, I often talk about the nervous system. So what can happen when you get really angry is that you are facing reactive anger. So that is a fight response. A fight response, that anger occurs or happens when your nervous system gets triggered. So something happens that makes you feel threatened at like a very primal level. You may feel powerless, you may feel disrespected, you may feel unsafe. And you can even notice that in your body. Like when you're being triggered, you can feel your chest tightening, your voice rises, and you may feel this rush to defend or attack. That's one strategy, right? The fight response. There are others. There's also the flight where you just run away. There's the fawn where you just try to be the good girl, or there's the freeze where you just completely collapse into depression, basically. But fighting is one of the ways for the nervous system to, yeah, to protect yourself, to lash out. It's something that I noticed on my own fertility journey is that I would get triggered by medical professionals all the time. I always felt like they didn't really see me, they didn't really hear me. And so I would, after my appointments, I was always so angry. And I realized at some point that this happened all the time, that I never felt heard, that I never felt seen. Um, and that this was a nervous system response. So that meant, from recognizing that this was actually my body's way, that anger was my body's way of trying to reclaim agency, I could take back a bit of control and then help my nervous system regulate in certain ways. And we'll get to that in a second. Now, the example I'm giving you, that nervous system response, that didn't mean that my doctors were treating me right at the same time. I do think that that helplessness that got triggered in the hospital, in the clinic, was also due to the way that the medical system is structured. So I do think, it was a nervous system response, and I was also angry at a much deeper level about my boundaries not being respected, about me not being seen as a person and not given the treatment that I needed. And that's where a second type of anger comes in. I call that the righteous anger, or your sacred no. So that is the no, the anger that signals there was actually a boundary that was crossed. And as you notice from my example, like the two can exist at this, they can coexist, right? One doesn't exclude the other. So I can have that trigger, that fight response, and on a much deeper level, that fight response might be triggered by a deeper injustice or a boundary that's being crossed. So that is something that I noticed for myself, that I didn't like the way the medical system was treating me. And I actually also, next to that own nervous system regulation work that I did, I started setting boundaries in the exam room. That was for me a really important way of creating safety in my clinic. And I was asking for what I needed. I told them, I need a break. I need a pause before we do the treatment. I need a moment to relax. I need a moment to just focus on my breath. I want to insert the instruments myself. I want you to go slowly. A lot of I want, So this was me really practicing voicing my needs. And it was scary as hell because, again, the good girl behavior, right? I was so afraid of being a difficult patient. But for my body and for my nervous system, this was actually such a good way of dealing with that anger and saying, okay, there's something deeper here. I won't go into detail here, but in the end, that even led to me setting up an entire campaign here in the Netherlands, advocating for more empowered physical exams. So when you really respect that anger, when you really respect your sacred no, when you really respect those boundaries, that can have immense healing consequences, not only for you, but for others as well. Now, this righteous anger, these boundaries, a good way to recognize them is also during the 2 week wait. I have an entire podcast episode about this, about how during the 2 week wait, your body is primed for pregnancy because your progesterone rises. So there is a natural tendency within the body. The body already feels like it's pregnant, and there's a natural tendency for the body to want to protect itself. So that's why you maybe have less energy, why you don't feel so social, why you don't want to go out, why you want to stay. It's all ways of your body saying, okay, let's protect this budding pregnancy. That is often why, especially the days before your menstruation, you may feel like you might find fault with everyone and you feel you're very irritable. Again, that's that inner critic that's trying to set boundaries for you. So I always say the 2 week wait is an excellent time, maybe not so much to have conversations with people about your boundaries, but to do a little bit of uh yeah, to do a little bit of examination and see what are the things that are triggering me right now, because those are probably signs that I'm not setting boundaries the right way, or those might be telling me if you have a lot of fights with your partner before your menstruation, then there is a need within you that's not being met by your partner. And rather than have to fight, see what it is that's so annoying, see what it is that you're so irritated about. And then, when you get out of that PMSE week, you can, when you so in your menstrual phase, for example, you're much more visionary. That's a great time to then see, okay, how can we find a solution in a way that's not so reactive? So that's the second type of anger, the righteous anger. Then there's also a third type of anger, displaced pain. And again, this can overlap with the other two categories. But this is when you get angry. And this, I feel, is often what happens when we get angry at our pregnant friends, co-workers. That anger is easier to feel than the grief, than the shame, than the fear of being left behind. I remember I had one co-worker at work who got pregnant, and I didn't talk to her for an entire year, for her entire pregnancy, basically. And the reason I got so upset is because her roommate at work got pregnant before her. And all of that happened after my first loss. So I lost my baby, tried to get pregnant again, and it didn't work. And then, the girl in the room next to me got pregnant, had a baby. And then her roommate got pregnant. And I was like, okay, all of these people are having babies. And I'm just not getting pregnant. So there was actually that really deep fear of this might never work for me that was underneath that anger, underneath that jealousy. So that anger was real, but it wasn't the core. And that was actually, I didn't do that at the time, but that would have been a nice invitation to go and see, okay, there's actually a deeper pain here that's not being addressed, because this is clearly quote unquote irrational anger, right? There was no clear reason to be so angry. So that's always a good invitation to create some space for yourself and sit and feel like, what is underneath this? So the three types of anger, we have that reactive nervous system anger, the fight. We have that sacred anger where your boundaries are not being respected or your needs are not being met. And then you have that displaced pain that presents as anger. How do you work with anger? Given that I gave you these three categories, so a first step for me would be to get curious and see what kind of anger is this? If you feel that anger coming up, what kind of anger is this? Am I being triggered by something right now? If so, what's underneath that? What need is not being met? And what is it trying to protect? Which part of me is so hurt that it's lashing out now? And you can do that by journaling. That's a good way. Like just free writing, where you start writing and you don't stop writing for 10 minutes. So you really get into that subconscious brain and see if you can really tease out unfiltered what is going on. Or maybe if journaling doesn't work, you just create a voice note for yourself where you just rant and then you listen. You try to see, okay, what's at the core. Um, and then when you've got connected to that anger, also make it move, let it move. Movement is medicine. So once, through that getting curious, you're really in touch with the anger. And then the body is such a great system to work with emotions. I always love to dance. So I would just turn on Rage Against the Machine. It's the music from the 90s. Now you know how old I am. Um, Start raging, start screaming, growing, just punching pillows. I had this one guest on the podcast who would put her, because she lived in an apartment building, so she would put her head in a bucket of water so she could scream. I'm less inhibited. So, and my neighbor's a drummer, so I just scream at home and I feel like you drum, I scream. Should be fine, right? But let it move. And what's important here, again, from that nervous system place, is that you let it out, but you try to stay present with the anger. So the idea is not to lose yourself, because when you lose yourself, you also start to dissociate a little bit. So you want this to be an embodied experience where you're using the body to feel, not to escape. It's a fine line, and it's something to experiment with. Can in that release, in that movement of the anger, can I still be with the anger, or is it overtaking me completely and am I losing control? Then it's time for you to just calm down a bit again. And that's actually the third step I'm going to give you. Recognize the nervous system in all of this. Oftentimes when you release that anger, your nervous system gets activated because it's scary for us to get angry. So once you've been with the emotion, also find ways to bring your nervous system back to a state of safety. And that can be walking in nature, humming. Humming is a good one, humming or singing, um, connecting with other people, finding someone who knows what you're going through. That's why women's circles, I always feel, are so great. That's actually a great place where that nervous system regulation, it's just what women's circles do. But also just find a friend where you can vent, and or maybe get a massage. With touch is always a good one, grounding touch. So finding ways to come back to the body in a place of safety. So that is how you work with anger. And then once that anger clears, you can also ask yourself, what's the boundary that I need? What does my body say no to, or which need is not being met? And then also really creating strategies for you to get that, what it is that you need. And finally, whenever we do nervous system work, and working with anger is definitely nervous system work, you also want to focus on building a library of glimmers. So a glimmer, that's really the opposite of a trigger. It's having a felt sense of safety, of beauty, of connection. So what can be really useful, especially if you're on a fertility journey and especially if it's been stressful, is to make a list of all the things that make you feel good. And it can be tiny moments of joy, just walking barefoot in the grass. There's this just finding that one space in your body that feels like home. There's always a place in your body that feels like home. Finding that place and connecting with that place in meditation. Just thinking of what my glimmers are. I just love to sit in any moment and feel what is there to enjoy right now in this moment. That's my biggest glimmer. Because then I start to realize no matter how bad I feel, there's always the feeling of sunlight on my skin, or just a beautiful tree standing outside. There's always something that brings me just a tiny bit of joy. So let me summarize that for you. The three kinds of anger. Anger can be a nervous system response. It can be a way for your body to really tell you that you need better boundaries, or it can be displaced pain. And sometimes it's all three at the same time. And it all starts by really getting curious. Working with anger starts with getting curious, looking at the anger, letting it move through you. And then also making sure that you regulate your nervous system, both in the moment by rebuilding the boundaries that you need and by building a library of glimmers. If this is something that you could use support with, I am starting a new online program this Sunday, May 25th. So if you hear this today on Friday when I publish this, you can still join. It's an online course. It's not so much focused on fertility. It's focused on developing like a solid connection with your womb space. So I do feel it's very beneficial for anyone who's on a fertility journey, because it's so much about connecting with the body, finding also that safe place within yourself. Also, like at a physical level, really identifying the emotions that have gotten stuck in your system and working with the body again in a very safe way to bring them up and let them go, let them just move through you rather than that they stay stuck in your, in your muscles, in your tissues, because that's what happens with emotions when you tighten up. The tightness, it remains in the system. And a very important thing that we do is that we develop that quality of you. I call that like the grown woman. I feel that, with that history I talked about, with needing to be the good girl all the time, what has gotten left behind is for us to be really able to stand as the women, the grown women that we are, and take care of ourselves, stand up for ourselves, but also hold ourselves in times of pain or desperation. And there is that part within you that is grown, that is able to carry you through everything that's going on, everything that you're going through right now. So it's so valuable to feel that it's not like you never need to rely on anyone else again, but it gives you such a sense of solidity and groundedness to know that, whatever happens, you can carry yourself. So if you're interested, you can sign up at thatfertilefeeling.com/womb. I would love to have you in the group. It's a 10-week course, so I'll release a module every week. And then there's also 3 online sessions where we meet with the entire community. And if you feel like, I know everyone's busy, so I made it small. It's like an hour a week. It's a guided practice that takes 20 minutes. And there's a lecture that takes 20 minutes. And then there's some additional exercises that take 20 minutes. So bare minimum is 20 minutes per week, just doing the guided practice. And if you want to add a bit more work, you can, look at the lecture, do the additional practices, just to make sure that you can fit it into your busy schedule. And I've also created a group on Signal where I'll check in with everyone every week. So that's a little bit of accountability there, but also inspiration. So I'm checking in with you to see if you have any questions, how, what your main takeaway was from the practice, what your intention is for the week. And you can really get inspired also by what the other women are sharing. So I would love to see you there, thatfertilefeeling.com/womb. And I'm wishing you a great weekend and hope to see you back in 2 weeks. Bye bye.